Welcome, everyone. Lovely to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us. This is the Practical Longevity Podcast, a space where we demystify fact from fiction in the longevity space and reveal your need to know info when it comes to preventative medicine and healing. I'm Dr. Mary Pines. I am Chief Scientific Officer at WellMe, and I'm sitting near beautiful Vancouver, Canada, coming to you live on Riverside, which is streaming on LinkedIn and Facebook. I'm here speaking with amazing health expert on the other side of the world, Candice Castle. She's in South Africa, and she is a cherished member of our WellMe practitioner team. Welcome, Candice.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
We're delighted to have you. Candice and I have already had such an amazing debrief and conversation. I'm so excited to be sharing with you. She is a true medical detective and a functional medicine consultant who helps people navigate the complexities of their immune system and cancer, specializing in complex and hard to treat cases. The topics we could dive into go very deep, and so we'll do our best to keep this conversation both relatable and actionable, and of course fun. So even though as a scientist, I really do love the detail, we'll try not to get too nerdy. So let's let's start off, Candice. Looking forward to going into what you do, but let's start with your big why. So I understand you came into functional medicine after your own health challenges. Can you tell us your story?
Yeah, I'll do my best to summarize it because it's a very long story. But my why is deeply personal, just because I didn't come to functional medicine by accident. And I think that is what makes a practitioner relatable, is if they do understand a little bit of of where the patient is coming from. In my case, it was born out of necessity. Years ago, I suffered from pancreatitis, unfortunately, which was triggered by medication I was given for a neck injury. What should have been a short-term issue, unfortunately for me, spiraled into a long-term health crisis. My pancreas unfortunately didn't heal properly and took extra long to even improve, and I ended up dependent on parental nutrition via a PICC line. That's just basically when they give you nutrition through an IV on a permanent basis, so you end up having a permanent IV implanted. I was eventually diagnosed with chronic pancreatitis because of the length of time that this went on. At no point was nutrition or supplements even suggested as a treatment. Being on a PICC line led to multiple infections and countless antibiotics, which completely destroyed my gut health. Obviously, at the time, I didn't realize what was going on or that it was destroying my gut health. I just went along with the conventional route. I was eventually diagnosed with intestinal failure because of that long-term antibiotic use in 2017. But I knew in my gut, literally and figuratively, that there was something deeper going on. I believed ultimately that I was dealing with Crohn's disease. And in 2020, I was finally given that diagnosis. It was only through functional medicine and nutritional support that I found real healing. And they looked at me as a whole person, not as just a diagnosis. And it was both a dietitian and that functional medicine practitioner that walked a very long journey with me, helping me to understand my body a little bit better. That experience changed everything for me. I went back to school, trained in functional medicine, immunology, and metabolic oncology, which I'm still training in further. That's how I changed the trajectory of my life, which is not uncommon these days. I hear more and more stories of people who've walked a similar journey to myself. And I ended up making it my life's work to help others heal from complex conditions like cancer and obviously autoimmunity as well. My mom was diagnosed with MS, and that also led me to pursue this. I've always believed that if we can reverse cancer specifically and autoimmune disease, they are often considered the hardest conditions to treat. Then there's obviously hope for every chronic disease, and this became my mission.
Amazing. What a story. Thank you for sharing. I know that goes far deeper, and my heart goes to you and to everybody who has this kind of incredibly intense experience trying to navigate the sort of conventional medicine system. So the metabolic oncology training that you've done, amazing. Also, you've also trained in immunology. So for the purposes of our topic today, I'd love to narrow in on the metabolic oncology, since sadly cancer is such a common topic these days. Let's start on treatment and then move into some prevention. So I understand that the metabolic approach to cancer sees cancer not as an isolated disease, but as a symptom of imbalances across the body, systematic. Can you tell us about what some of those imbalances are that you're always looking for as a medical detective?
Absolutely. So the metabolic approach to cancer views cancer as a symptom, and not the root cause. So there's more to it than just what you're seeing, tumor and diagnosis. It's ultimately the result of terrain imbalances. So the terrain being your body, there's something going wrong, an internal environment that has become hospitable to cancer over time. And these imbalances drive and fuel the cancer. So that's important to understand. You've got a condition, you've been diagnosed with it, but it's driven by something else. So there is something causing that cancer. So we focus on 10 key areas that influence whether the cancer can take hold and grow. And these include, so I'm going to just summarize it for you briefly. Not everybody knows the medical terms. So epigenetics being one of them. This is just how your genes are expressed or suppressed by environmental factors. So how the external world is affecting your DNA. And then metabolic health and blood sugar regulation. So it's important to understand cancer cells rely on glucose and glutamine for energy. Not only as cancer progresses over time, they actually rely on many things for fuel. But right in the beginning, glucose and glutamine are quite sort of the main thing that feeds and pushes cancer to grow. It's also part of the cause. So if there's that imbalance, it's pushing the cause. Inflammation. Chronic unresolved inflammation is the fertile ground for cancer. And this is usually the actual trigger, is like a low-grade inflammation over many years. Then immune function. If the immune system isn't vigilant, cancer cells can evade detection. Very important. Then hormonal balance. Very big when it is a hormone-dependent cancer, but just as important when it's not. So imbalances in estrogen and other hormones, your cortisol and insulin can also drive cancer growth. Then detoxification pathways, the body's ability to clear toxins that damage DNA and fuel tumor development. It's obviously linked to the way your liver and your kidneys detox and excrete those toxins and how well they're working from a genetic standpoint. Microbiome health, this is a big one that we don't focus on enough. In cancer treatment, the conventional way. A healthy gut microbiome is absolutely key to immune balance and inflammation control. Very, very important. Then oxygenation and circulation. Hypoxic, low oxygen environments encourage tumor development. So hypoxia is just when there is low oxygen. And that is a problem for many of us, partially due to lack of exercise, but not the only thing that drives that. Stress response and circadian rhythm. So chronic stress and poor sleep disrupt your healing and immune function. Then mental, emotional, and spiritual health is the last one, but actually one of the most important. So unresolved trauma, lack of purpose, spiritual disconnection, weakened resilience, and healing potential. So ultimately, we don't view cancer as the tumor per se. Cancer is a whole body process, and unless we address the terrain imbalances, we're only treating the symptom and not the cause.
Wow, I thank you for that. When people read the word metabolic approach, they think, oh, that's like, digestion and food maybe, but you really illustrated it as all of the pieces. We went from epigenetics to circulation and stress management. I love that. So this is really so all encompassing.
Absolutely. Just a side note, the metabolic approach came into play just because that word actually infers that there's something wrong with your metabolism. And in order to fix that, you've got to fix all these areas that we just discussed. So your metabolism is not just how you digest food or whether your insulin is out of balance. It's pretty much everything. And we know that cancer is actually driven by mitochondrial dysfunction. So the mitochondria are actually the powerhouse of the cell. A lot of people know that, some don't. And that is where the dysfunction actually happens. It's not just the DNA that, the doctors are taught, the somatic theory of cancer is that it's a genetic disease. And we've actually seen through Dr. Thomas Seyfried's research that it's not. So he's actually done research where he swapped a cancer cell and a healthy cell's nuclei with all the DNA or genetic material. And obviously, like, hoping to prove either this is a genetic condition or it's not. And the cancer cell did not become a healthy cell, and the healthy cell did not become a cancer cell by swapping those nucleus. So they were hoping that that's what it would do, and that would then prove that it's a genetic condition. But it didn't. And so he proved his point, which was it's not genetics. It doesn't make sense that it is. It's actually something else going wrong with the cell. And then he swapped the mitochondria. In a healthy cell and a cancer cell, he swapped the mitochondria, and the healthy cell became cancerous and the cancer cell became healthy, despite having their original genetic material. So that shows us that cancer is not DNA that's sick, or that you were born with the guarantee that you would have gotten cancer one day. It actually proves that it's something that we acquire, similar to getting diabetes because you're not looking after yourself. Very much the same. Diabetes is a metabolic condition. Cancer is a metabolic condition.
I love that.
Just to add to
that. That is amazing. And the scientist in me is thinking about nuclear transfer and, like, and for the listener, there's like the nucleus holds the DNA, and the DNA gets these little marks on it that tells it how to function, which is called epigenetics. That's influenced by our lifestyle a lot, and by, how we were raised, and even how we were in the womb with what our mother and father did. But the stuff outside of the nucleus, that includes those little mitochondria, those cellular energy factories that are actually so much more than energy factories. I mean, we used to think, oh, that's all they do. They make energy. They are master regulators of so much. So that's so cool.
They regulate the cell division as well, primarily, actually. So if we look after our mitochondria, then we're going to have less of a predisposition to getting cancer one day.
Amazing. And we'll talk more about the factors that influence mitochondrial health in a bit. I know listeners are probably wondering about that, but first I'd love to know, and maybe you'll come into this in this next question, but curiosity, like, when people come to you seeking cancer support, you're doing so much, looking from so many angles. What does the patient journey actually look like?
Yeah, very good question. So it's very individualized, and that's what makes it different to conventional care. But it always begins with a deep dive into the very terrain we've just discussed. The first step is taking a comprehensive health history, which includes not just their diagnosis, but also their life story. So stresses, traumas, toxic exposures, that's a big one, lifestyle, and their spiritual beliefs. From there, we move into advanced functional and genetic testing. Taking note that not every patient is able to do that from an affordability standpoint, but if they can, that would be first choice to get a clear picture of what's out of balance. That really helps. So we assess areas such as genetics, blood sugar regulation, inflammation, immune function, detox pathways, hormonal balance, microbiome health, and more. And once we have this full picture, I design a personalized integrative plan. This often involves working collaboratively with the oncologist or the medical team of the patient to ensure that everything we do is safe and complementary to the conventional treatment. Obviously, if they've already finished conventional treatment, or they've been told that there is no, alternative thing they can do, they've basically run out of options, the chemo's not working or radiation's not working, then we don't necessarily work with the oncologist if the oncologist has said, unfortunately, the patient needs to go home, and be with their family. Then we might decide not to. So that's just also individualized and patient-based, depending on. And then I never recommend abandoning conventional care if that's what the patient is already doing or wants to pursue in the future. Instead, we focus on supporting their terrain so their body becomes less hospitable to cancer, and then more supportive of the healing and resilience. So that's the goal. The goal is for the body to be more supportive of healing. So the plan, just to kind of expand on that, will include metabolic therapies such as a ketogenic dietary strategy and intermittent fasting to target cancer metabolism. That's something we could actually dive into for hours, but just basically when you are following a more ketogenic diet, you are blocking glucose metabolism in your whole body, and not just within the tumor cells, but within the body. So a lot of genes and mitochondrial DNA switch on and off due to the fact that you are inhibiting glucose. So it's a epigenetic regulator to do that. So that's just a dietary strategy, something that's technically free because you've got to eat and is not something you have to purchase, other than the food, of course. Mitochondrial support, which is really important, often with nutrients and compounds that support cellular energy production and reduce oxidative stress. Immune modulation through specific dietary strategies, lifestyle practices, and evidence-based integrative therapies aimed at strengthening the immune function. That's actually really important because often the major cause for cancer in a patient is that there was immune dysregulation. Then repurposed pharmaceuticals, like antiparasitics or metabolic regulators, always in coordination with their medical team. If a patient is under the care of an oncologist or a group of doctors, a full medical team, they always get told that the patient has decided to use the repurposed pharmaceuticals. And then we work together with them to structure how to take them. Detoxification support, including lifestyle practices and nutritional approaches to support liver function and hormone clearance. That's very important, especially in hormone-sensitive cancers. And then hormone balance support, guided by comprehensive testing usually, and targeted approach that brings hormones into balance. And then lastly, mind-body medicine. Once again, we always mention this last, but very important, such as breath work, guided imagery, binaural beats, which I call music therapy, rebounding, Rife therapy, which I'm happy to discuss. Not everybody's heard of Rife, and a strong emphasis on prayer and spiritual healing. So we often incorporate the emotional and spiritual practices outlined in the Radical Remission Project. For those who haven't heard of it, it's a project by Dr. Kelly Turner. I'll speak about it more just now. Encouraging deep emotional healing and connection. So to purpose, very, very important. I'm based in South Africa, and for clients here, I'm able to recommend and supply those specific supplements where legally permitted. However, for my international patients, depending on the laws in their country, I am not always allowed to do that. So it just depends. It's country specific, and we try to follow each country's laws. In those cases, I focus on educational guidance because I am an advocate. This is what I do. I advocate for this form of healing, helping them understand what their body may need and empowering them to work with their local practitioner or resources. I basically act as a guide and an advocate, of course, walking alongside each person through their healing journey, whether they are currently undergoing treatment, in remission, or in survivorship. We work together to optimize their terrain for long-term health and well-being. Sorry, that's a big mouthful, but that summarizes what we do.
That was great. There's so many pieces in there. We could chat for hours. As you were speaking, Candice, I wish I had met you 8 years ago because my mom was diagnosed very late in the game with pancreatic cancer, which is obviously, like, one of the hardest ones. And in the hospital,
definitely.
they were giving her hospital food, high sugar, no talk about nutrition. And I was trying to kind of bring her into the keto fold, but yeah, it was probably too late. But I just absolutely love the work you do. Thank you. So
there are differences, and we can chat about that too, but there are differences within certain tumor environments where there are exceptions to keto. When I say exceptions, I don't mean that we don't utilize it entirely, but where we modify it. So for some forms of cancer, we do modify it, pancreatic cancer usually being one of them. I find that in my practice, pancreatic cancer, this is purely out of interest, does respond quite well to antioxidants. It also responds to glucose restriction, obviously the pancreas, right, which makes insulin, but it tends to respond really well to antioxidants as well. So that's something that's just a side note, because it is a difficult cancer to treat, but very few people know that it responds so well to antioxidants.
Yeah, that's amazing information. And it's really cool that you have specific protocols for different types of tumors. Yeah. I would love to go a little bit deeper into some of the functional and genetic testing you do. On that vein, like, what information are you looking for, and just how important is it?
Yeah, a lot. So I think of it like this. There are two forms of functional testing. You get the subjective test and you get the objective test and results. You are the subject, and your DNA is what makes you and what makes you unique, and not the same as the next person who has the same diagnosis. Objective testing are the results, are the kind of tests basically that tell you what's going on in the here and now. In other words, yes, you've got genetics that say X or Y about you. You know, are you prone to inflammation or not? Do you detox effectively or not? But what's going on in the here and now? As an example of my case, I'd been on many antibiotics. So a gut health test like a GI map or any test that actually maps the microbiome, that is a objective functional test. This is how I think of it. This is my way of viewing it. Basically looking at what's going on in the here or now based on the environmental exposures a person has had over their lifetime. So these tests end up being crucial because they give us an idea of what's going on with your terrain. It allows us to get a blueprint of where the person's weaknesses lie so that we can tailor their treatment with precision, or with more precision than what we would without it. So genetic variations, we look at methylation. Methylation is it's quite a complex process, but basically it looks at how well your DNA repairs itself, and it also forms part of whether you detox effectively. So we look at genes. These are just gene names. Don't worry too much about them, but MTHFR is one of them. The COMT gene is another. Then we look at GST genes, and those are just the genes that code for how well you detox. Glutathione is an antioxidant, and it is one of the main things that help you detox effectively. And unfortunately, sorry, just give me a moment. The gene tests that actually look at these things don't give that information effectively these days to patients. So I like the fact that when I am helping or assessing a patient, I can actually go through these types of genetic tests properly so that they get a better understanding. Because there are certain patients that have gene deletions, and if they have gene deletions, that could affect the way that they detox. So that is something that we would need to discuss with them because they don't always understand what that means. And so that's something we definitely look for. Then inflammation and hormone metabolism, metabolic health markers like fasting insulin, HbA1c, glucose, and ketones. That's something very important. Then inflammatory markers like CRP, that's just your common blood tests that get taken, looking at IL-6, TNF-alpha, and those are also inflammation markers from blood tests. And then your estimated sedimentation rate, which is something that's also seen on a blood test. Some patients that are listening, or people that are listening, may be familiar with it, but it's just inflammation markers, blood tests. Then hormone balance, your estrogen metabolites or cortisol patterns, looking at your thyroid, very important. Immune function, we sometimes ask for testing to look at like their natural killer cell activity. Those are just white blood cells that are part of your immune system that fight cancer. And your microbiome health, just like I discussed my GI map story now, that is something that really, really helps with looking whether there's dysbiosis or leaky gut indicators. And then lastly, I'd often do this test, but usually because of its expense, it'll be a last resort. We do a test through a company called RGCC in Greece, and they actually look at the cancer stem cells and at circulating tumor cells, and they actually give us a breakdown of what kind of testing to do and what kind of treatment will work as well. So for an example, if your patient's been on chemotherapy and it hasn't been working, this test can tell you which chemotherapy is going to be most effective for that patient. And it also tells you all the more natural integrative treatments that work best for that patient's cancer. So that is a big one that most people don't even know exists. Then that data allows us to make these targeted interventions rather than a generalized approach.
Amazing. I'm writing that down, actually. I want to talk to you more about that at another time, but that is really fascinating. And I love, it's that we have so many tools now to direct therapy rather than sort of like the sledgehammer approach of blanket chemo. So, and I love that you are integrative in that you're working with conventional, but also bringing in all these tools.
Yeah, the thing is, I think as medical practitioners, we need to be more open to helping a patient survive rather than fighting which approach works better, you know. And if there is a patient that is going to do incredibly well with a certain chemotherapy while we simultaneously boost their immune system and their resilience to infections while you're doing chemo, their resilience to even cachexia. You know, chemo can drive cachexia. Cachexia is when there's this muscle wasting that happens in cancer patients. And there is some evidence that shows chemotherapy is part of this problem. So if we can build a patient up and know that actually there is a chemotherapy that's going to work most effectively against this patient's cancer, why withhold that? Rather go alongside the chemo and boost their immune system and help their body strengthen and increase their muscle mass, you know, and help them to detox effectively and increase all these things, fix their microbiome so that it's not negatively impacted by the chemotherapy, which could act like an antibiotic would. Obviously, chemo can wipe out your microbiome, right? So let's help the patient prevent that. And so that's what that kind of testing does. It says, don't worry, we know chemo didn't work, but maybe you were on the wrong chemotherapy. Maybe your cancer is not going to respond to that chemo that you were on. So let's get you the right chemotherapy as well as everything else that's going to kill that cancer and save your life.
Absolutely. Such a rational approach.
Yeah.
Yeah. To switch gears a second, we've talked a lot about the molecular, the genetic, the biochemical. You also believe in addressing cancer from the other angles, emotional, mental, spiritual. I'm curious if you have seen any trends or themes in the emotional, mental, spiritual realms. For example, are there certain personality traits that are more maybe prone to these kinds of issues? Yeah.
That is so true. In fact, within the metabolic approach to cancer, within the course that we do, we actually hone down on this quite a lot because that is a very, very, very big contributor to a cancer diagnosis. So cancer, obviously, as we've been speaking, happens to the whole body, not just to the area where the tumor is. So there are quite a few people that I've seen that do share common traits, and the science is showing the same thing, which is quite interesting. So your overgivers, so the overachiever is the next one, but your overgiver, that's somebody who is the caretaker and who puts themselves last. So caretakers can take different, responsibilities. They are people that are not necessarily caretakers just to family members, but the guys that take on everything at work, they take on everything at home, they take on everything within friendships. Then they tend to be these perfectionists, and that's where the overachieving comes in. So your type A personalities, always pushing, always achieving, often suppressing emotions. So that's a very big one as well. People with unresolved trauma or grief, which creates chronic stress and emotional and immune suppression. They tend to be more prone to getting cancer. So here we can see how healing trauma can really be beneficial for suppressing that, for suppressing cancer. And then those that feel disconnected from their sense of purpose or spirituality. That's a big one too. I'll focus on this more now, but we actually utilize Dr. Kelly Turner's Radical Remission Project, which I mentioned earlier. After studying 1,500 cases of spontaneous remission, she identified these 10 healing factors, and 7 of them are emotional, mental, or spiritual. And these 10 healing factors are what these 1,500 people all had in common, who radically healed against the doctor's prognosis. So if the doctor said 6 months or a year, they outlived that by far. She had to obviously prove that these patients had really healed, but these are the things they had in common. So when they healed, they released suppressed emotions. They found joy and purpose was one of the big ones. If a patient didn't have purpose, they tended not to do so well. And when the patient found that purpose again, that's when they started recovering. Then cultivating spiritual connection, embracing a supportive community, or embracing your family support, friendship support. People that are saying to you, you've got this, you can do this, and just backing you in everything. And then those that empower themselves in their healing journey, those that question, those that say, I actually want to follow my gut. My gut says I need to do this and not that. And those that do research. So these are the kinds of patients that usually come to me. And so you can see that both sides of the story are true. The one is, yes, there are these types of people that are the perfectionists and the type A personalities, the people with unresolved trauma. But the same is true on the opposite end. Those who release those emotions, those who find joy and purpose again, they are the ones that get healed. Not cured. I have a thing about using that word, but healed. So it's quite interesting. Healing isn't just about killing the cancer cells. It's about restoring the whole person.
And it's not something you need to do once and then you fall back into old habits. It's like, it's a journey. We're always on. I love that. That all makes total sense. I'm actually, my mind went to the work of a wonderful Harvard psychotherapist and researcher, Dr. Ellen Langer, who has been around she's probably over 70 years old, but she speaks to the power of the mind in healing, and she has a profound body of work. I offer often to my patients a podcast that she did with the Freakonomics guy, and it's called It's on People I'd Mostly Admire. Dr. Ellen Langer, Langer, and people listen and they come back and they're like, I had no idea.
Wow.
My mind, my spirit has not been on board, and I have been stuck, whether they're stuck with weight loss, they're stuck with IBS or depression, or it's like, you gotta get this part and this part on board. So I'm so glad you spoke to that, and so beautifully. I was wondering about, actually, if you could just repeat or give us the details on the study on the 10 healing factors common among 1,500 people. Who was that? Was it a book? I want to read it.
So it's Dr. Kelly Turner. So Dr. Kelly Turner is quite famous in the integrative and the metabolic cancer or oncology world. And I use her teachings in my consultations and that kind of thing. A lot of people know about her. So she did her doctorate in this research. And it grew, the talk of what she had done grew so much that she ended up creating a full-blown project. She wrote a book. So yes, she did write a book called The Radical Remission Project. And then she wrote a second book called Radical Hope, if I'm not mistaken. I might be quoting it wrong, but as far as I know, it's Radical Hope. And so in the first book, she mentioned 9 factors. And in the second book, she said that she went back and realized there actually is a 10th factor. So I'll quickly read it to you. These are the emotional ones that I mentioned. She said in common with all these patients that she had done research on, they all released suppressed emotions. They all found joy and purpose again. They all cultivated spiritual connection. They embraced a supportive community. They empowered themselves in their healing journey. And then some of the others that are not linked to the spiritual and emotional side are exercise. That was the 10th one. So a lot of the patients originally said they didn't exercise to get better. But after going back and talking to them and re-interviewing them, a lot of them said, oh, I thought you meant, did I go to the gym? And they, I didn't go to the gym, but I did walk around the block. I did walk up and down the corridor. Like that kind of thing, I did move. So movement, essentially. And then radical diets and supplements. So radical diet change and supplementation are some of the others. And I'll have to go look up the rest. I don't have them in front of me, but that's basically the majority of those 10. So they all did these things. One of the things that we don't focus on enough is the spiritual connection. So a lot of the patients who didn't believe that there is a God, for example, that has a purpose for them, it kind of links. So when they believed, okay, there is actually, a spiritual reason for my existence, suddenly they would start healing. So it's quite interesting that this is true, because the science is also showing that this is true. Patients without purpose don't tend to heal very quickly. So that's a big one.
Mic drop there. Amazing. And so that, yeah, that really reframes things from
Yeah.
from how, and like giving us power through our beliefs and our
And the
mind.
interesting thing is that it's a difficult one. I'm not gonna don't let this
Yeah.
sound like I'm saying it's easy. It's actually one of the hardest ones to achieve. Okay, it takes a lot of healing. If you've been rejected as a child, for example, that is trauma, and that makes it hard to believe that you've got a purpose. It's very difficult. You've got to work with a counselor or a psychologist or somebody that's prepared to walk a journey with you. I find, interestingly enough, that it's when the family member walks with or a friend walks with that patient and just backs them up and encourages them. I've got a patient whose fiance is just like her everything in this fight. Like, he quit his job, and I'm not saying that that's the way that it should be, but because of all the things he's done to help her heal, she's healing against all odds. And so it takes healing, but it is technically a free thing. It's not something you're spending money on. It's not a test. It's not food. It's not supplements. One of the knocks that we get with this metabolic approach is that it's so expensive. It's expensive to buy supplements. It's expensive to change your diet to an extent, because you've got to start buying, let's say, gluten-free foods, for example, that cost more. But these spiritual and emotional things don't really cost money per se. It's just the journey and the decision to turn around and say, I want to heal and I want to grow in my purpose and that kind of thing.
Amazing. And that's something that you also help to
Yeah.
support. Very, very cool. So yeah, on that note, on the lifestyle piece, if you have the 5 lifestyle factors that everyone should be aware of and to integrate in their life to help avoid a cancer diagnosis, can you share with us what those are?
Yeah, I think that the top 5, there's more than 5, but the top 5 would be essentially, number 1, balancing blood sugar through your diet and intermittent fasting. In this case, being metabolically flexible is the key to health and to cancer prevention. Okay. Then reducing inflammation, big, because that's the driver, usually the original driver, through healing the gut, reducing toxins, eating an anti-inflammatory diet, very important. Then next one is supporting detoxification. And this is there are various ways to support detoxification. Something that is underutilized is drinking clean water every day. We don't drink enough water, and we are consuming water that's filled with chemicals, which isn't great. Then supporting your liver in every other way, supplements, sweating, and avoiding environmental toxins as far as possible. Prioritizing sleep is the next one, and your circadian rhythm, because deep sleep restores immune function and hormone balance. So that's important. And then the 5th one is spend time in nature. So this is what I see helps most patients: getting outside, grounding, receiving sunlight. Naturally, obviously, support your vitamin D levels too. It reduces stress and it improves your overall well-being. So those are the top 5.
That is awesome. And if there was a couple more you would add in, I'm curious. I'm so curious.
Yeah, so we spoke now about your gut health and that kind of thing with inflammation, but I would actually prioritize that as an entire extra step. So reducing inflammation, yes, through gut healing, but gut healing is actually one of the primary things you should be doing anyway. And gut healing is not just about reducing inflammation only, but you actually need to change your whole microbiome so that the byproducts that your microbiome gives off when you're eating is beneficial to you. Butyrate, as an example, is a short-chain fatty acid that a healthy microbiome gives off, and that protects you from cancer. But we don't focus on butyrate a lot. So I actually use butyrate as a supplement to try and help get a cancer patient's gut microbiome into a more metabolically flexible state. And obviously that's protectant against cancer. If you've got colon or stomach cancer, gastric cancer, even more so. So gut healing would definitely be the next one. And then stress is a very big one. I've said spend time in nature to reduce stress, but stress on its own, if you're working in an environment that's toxic and your adrenaline is through the roof every day and you're fighting cancer, my advice is always is this worth it? Can we maybe find you a different job? Is there any way that you could change your roles at work so that you could improve that? Because if your cortisol is through the roof all the time, you're going to end up with other conditions, never mind cancer, and it's going to make it that much harder to fight. So stress and your actual relationship environments are also very, very important.
Makes sense. Great,
Yeah.
thank you. I'm going to switch gears again because we'll try to wrap this up in the next approximately 5 minutes and give time for some audience questions if we have any. I'm curious, what on the big picture of cancer research today, what do you think is the most promising or exciting thing happening in the field right now?
So the best thing I would say is that we are looking more into looking for the root and understanding that root. So actually, this is a very good question. The work of Dr. Thomas Seyfried, who I mentioned earlier, who did those studies about the mitochondria being one of the triggers of cancer, Dr. Naisha Winters, who I'm training under, and they, alongside with that pulse protocol that Dr. Thomas Seyfried does. I haven't spoken about that, but he is researching into the press pulse metabolic strategy and combining therapies like ketosis, fasting, hyperbaric oxygen treatment, and mitochondrial support. I find that this is what's changing the face of cancer care. So we're moving more towards a terrain-based, personalized, integrative oncology. And ultimately, this is incredibly hopeful. It's the first time that we have actually started looking at the depth of the root cause of cancer and what to do about it.
Awesome.
Rather than treating the symptoms.
Yeah. I'm so curious about, actually, if you wouldn't mind, I'm sort of fascinated by the hyperbaric oxygen HBOT approach. Can you just give us a snippet on that? Why that is effective with cancer?
We spoke about right in the beginning that hypoxia or lack of oxygen is one of the contributing factors. If your body is hypoxic for many years on end, remember, cancer doesn't usually happen overnight. It's the combination of those factors we spoke about in the beginning. So hyperbaric oxygen treatment could be one of the ways in which we help that oxygenation of the blood once again. There are certain contraindications. So like, for instance, if a patient has got a cystis or there's fluid buildup around the organs, we cannot recommend hyperbaric oxygen therapy. But for patients who are stage 1, stage 2 diagnosis with no such complications, it is incredibly powerful in oxygenating the body over time. That, of course, helps blood flow throughout the body, and anything you do and take internally then can get into the bloodstream more effectively because of that blood flow being better. So it's one of the strategies that many integrative oncologists are utilizing. It just needs to be done correctly. And so we work with a medical practitioner, like the oncologist, to work out the best strategy for each patient using that therapy.
Okay, amazing. I wanted to know a little more of that, because when I was first starting out in research about what feels like 1,000 years ago, but was probably about 2010, we were looking at the genetic underpinnings of cancer cells, and in the lab, a biochemistry lab I was in, we were using these models for hypoxic cells, so cells that aren't, I guess, respiring, and that's all about mitochondria and seeing what's going on here with the growth. So that's really cool that that's come into the fold now. Great. So I'm going to just ask you one last question before we open it up to the audience. If there's anything anybody else wants to ask, please drop it in the chat. Let me know and I'll read out your question. On a personal note, Candice, what's one daily habit or practice that you swear by for your own longevity and cancer prevention?
So it's quite difficult, similarly to the other question, to give just one, but I'm going to split it between spiritual and physical. So for me, prayer, and in my specific case, each person's different, but for me, it's believing that I'm healed on a daily basis. So walking into that healing is very important, because if I fear, getting sick and that kind of thing, it's not going to help me. So I live each day knowing I've got a purpose, that I'm loved, and that my work here isn't finished. So, and that unwavering mindset gives me strength and focus and hope. So that is something that's very important for me. But on a physical level, I prioritize avoiding processed sugars. That is very big. I've got Crohn's disease, and that is an inflammatory disorder. I need to prevent that inflammation from getting out of hand, and I actually need to stop it entirely. So prioritizing avoiding processed sugars, following a ketogenic diet, that is primary physical improvement or physical thing that I do every day. I have to do that. It stabilizes my blood sugar. It's the key to metabolic health and to cancer prevention. So that for me is, if I'm helping cancer patients, I've got to live what I'm teaching, right? So that is on the physical level what I do to keep healthy. There are other things. My gut is important. I also enjoy spending time outside. I think it's important to take a break. Otherwise, you end up getting sick yourself, and that's not great.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's kind of wonderful that the things that are so good for us prevention-wise are also the things that make us feel really good, like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So wonderful. Thank you. Let's just see what our audience has for us here. So Kale asks, thank you for the question, Kale. Since breast cancer is the most common cancer for women, do you have any specific recommendations for women to prevent and catch it early? Good question.
Yeah. So in my case, it's difficult to do this without functional testing. I'll tell you why. I have found that just giving a blanket advice to a patient without them seeing that they've got this driving sort of underlying cancer problem lurking around, generally the advice is just not followed correctly. So the reason for breast cancer is partially because your liver does not detox properly, and you end up recycling hormones. And those recycled hormones cause DNA damage. I always explain it like this. It looks like shards of glass, tiny shards of glass that are cutting the DNA when you recycle hormones. And so one of the best things you can do is to help your body not recycle those hormones. So the blanket advice would be your typical things that help gene expression improve in that sense, which is broccoli and cauliflower, your cruciferous vegetables in terms of diet. But what I do find is that when we actually do a functional test and we look at those urine metabolites, and a patient can see, I am actually making these recycled estrogens in my body. It's just going over and over and over and spilling into my bloodstream. And I am actually causing DNA damage, or it is physically happening in my body. When they see that, the changes that they make are suddenly permanent, and they're able to stick to it. So that's just something I've seen in practice is, if you don't see it, the patient sometimes doesn't want to believe that, this dietary change is a permanent thing. So that's something I do. I recommend all women actually test. We also look at genetics, and if they see that they're prone to getting breast cancer, or there's a family history of breast cancer, then we look at those genetics. We do a urine metabolite test to have a look at what's going on. Internationally, it's a Dutch test. Here in South Africa, we've got a local test that tests exactly the same thing, and it tells you how much those DNA adducts are, how high they are, or how low they are. Not everybody's, cancering is what we call it, or pre-cancering. So we try and prove that there is an issue, or that there could be an issue. And then that blanket advice essentially is supporting methylation through supplements that support that, and supporting diet and detoxification with your cruciferous vegetables. Berberine is another thing that we do. But that is something that's very important. Also, removing carbohydrates, your processed carbs from your diet, drastically reduces breast cancer.
Right.
Yeah.
Amazing. Okay. And you mentioned, I love that you're talking to these pathways, these hormone pathways. I look at these two, the estrogens. And I'm curious, you mentioned the dietary approach with the broccoli and there's a supplement called DIM, diindole methane, which contains this active ingredient. Are you mostly trying to do it with food, or do you supplement as well?
No. So if I see that the patient is really making high amounts of DNA adducts, which is just a word that explains DNA damage that's actively occurring in the now, then I do utilize supplements, because diet takes a while to kick in. Okay. That is, if we were always looking after ourselves from childhood, you don't have to worry about these things. But the reality is, in the lifestyle that we live these days, it's just not that easy. So if there's an element of we need to do this with haste, then I will definitely use supplements. If I'm treating a breast cancer patient, then I use supplements. Diet is obviously the key. That cannot change and should not falter. But supplements are important so that you can get to the root of it a little bit quicker than diet on its own. So yeah, I do use supplements. When we do the supplements, we retest those urine metabolites to test whether it's actually working or not. Yeah.
Amazing. Beautiful. Thank you. Paul in the audience says, I've been paying attention. So many questions bubbling in my head. My wife is in the middle of chemo for a second breast cancer round, 2019, and again now an doctor by trade and conviction, and less receptive to functional medicine than she might be. So I am all yours for strategies that can support. Yes, Paul, we hear you. It's a tricky line to walk. So hopefully she's listening and can take some things away from this conversation.
Definitely.
On that note, do you do how does if a person is unsure, is there a sort of a discovery process that they can go through with you before that they can commit to this kind of a service?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we usually do is, there's a consultation. I explain this. I actually show pictures, which is better for most patients than just speaking, scientific language, to physically see it, to see an example of how this works, and where I explain liver detoxification in a more simple way than I did now. I use the analogy of a bath, and we go into detail about how that works and how it's not necessarily anybody's fault. You've got genes that are coding the way in which your liver detoxes. You don't know any better. Over time, there's inflammation because of these DNA adducts that are occurring. I also explain it like this. It's like those shards of glass cut your DNA. So I go through this whole process where I explain everything. Then if we can do testing, especially for hormone-based cancers, we do it. And once they've done this, they see it and things just make sense suddenly. And that's where I generally see the biggest response as well, is when the patient sees it, like I said just now, and they're able to stick to it because you've basically proven that this is really happening. And can I tell you, honestly, I have tested for prevention, and there are more people or women than I can tell you that have this problem. And with men, the same test for prostate cancer applies. So, you can have a patient come for prevention because sister or brother has cancer, and they want to see, and then we see, okay, there is actually a problem here, and we can then step in and prevent it. Now, it doesn't matter if you're already cancering or preventing, a similar protocol is followed. And then if the person has got active cancer, especially if it's stage 4, we do tend to recommend working with your oncologist and myself, where we get you a few off-label meds temporarily. It's not a permanent thing. It's not good for you to be on those off-label meds for a long time, but to try and encourage the tumor cells to just get weaker while you are doing all the other treatment.
Okay, absolutely fascinating. Thank you, Candice. It's nice to know that there is also people are able to take an active prevention route with you as well if it's in their family. That's so powerful. There's so much fear. Yeah. Great. Well, I am going to just say we have 2 minutes left. Just to wrap it up, I would love to ask one more quick question. Something we haven't spoken to yet is exactly that. It's the fear. So there's obviously a ton of fear and anxiety that come into play when someone gets a diagnosis of cancer, on top of what's going on already. Can you speak to that in terms of how you handle that on the road to recovery and making informed decisions?
Yeah, I think this is actually a very important question, and something that nobody really thinks of, especially when they are in this process. If it's easier when you look from the outside in than being in it. When you are given this diagnosis of cancer, immediately fear sets in, anxiety, and this, where do I go? Who do I go see? Do I need a second opinion? Should I just follow what the doctor says? All these questions, your mind is racing, your heart is pounding. And when you go home, that fear just sinks in more and more and more. And as a result of that, that ends up driving a fear-driven decision. which is not going to be your best decision. Obviously, if you are anxious and you are filled or riddled with fear, that is not going to be your best decision. Now, I'm not saying that the decision you would make with fear is going to definitely be wrong, but it is going to be shrouded. It's not going to be clear thinking, and you are going to end up, I did it myself, so I've been there and I know it. I can speak from experience in that sense. When you are very sick and you just believe that the doctor's, way is the only way and the best way, and the doctor says surgery and chemo and everything else that goes with it, it's not to say that that's wrong, but the question is, are you strong enough to deal with that treatment? Are you going to be in the best possible build and fitness and with your best possible immune system able to keep you going? Are you going to end up being riddled with infections when you do the chemo because your immune system was already weak? Those are questions that you would ask when you are thinking clearly. We actually have a document that we give to our patients with 10 questions that they ask their oncologist, so that if they were sitting there in fear the first time, when they go back, they've calmed down and they're armed with these questions. How will this affect me? What are the chances of this chemo working? What would be the next step if this chemotherapy doesn't work? How much are you thinking about my immune system, doctor? Is there anything that you can suggest to help me boost my immune system? Those are questions that we give the patient, and they go to their doctor and ask those questions. And it should be something that the doctor doesn't, push away or shy off and say, no, I'm not interested in. If it's a good oncologist, they will be more than willing to say, I hear your concerns. Let's sit and discuss this nicely. And I'm hoping that this way of approaching this is going to end up driving change with even the conventional doctors. When more and more patients start asking questions, it ends up becoming the norm, right? Yeah. So fear equals shrouded or clouded decision making. Whereas if you know that you've got this and you can beat this, suddenly you step back and the way that you proceed with the treatment is entirely different.
Absolutely. Amazing. I love that resource for people. That's so empowering. Half the battle is like, oh, what do I do? What do I say? How do I get the best care?
Yeah, exactly.
There's your questions, folks. That's awesome, Candice. Thank you so much. I am going to wrap it up for now. Powerful information. Thank you, says Erica. Lisette, I just started my journey with Candice and I'm now more excited. Thank you. Yeah, thanks, guys, everyone in the audience. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for such an enlightening conversation, Candice. Oh my gosh, I took so many notes. Yeah, you have so much wisdom. Cool.
Absolute pleasure.
Yeah, thank you for the work you do in this world. It's so profound.
Thanks, guys. It's an absolute pleasure.
Yeah. So again, thanks for
absolute
joining
pleasure.
us.
Love you being here. Thank you for having me, by the way.
Oh, thank you. For everyone in the audience, thank you. This has been a pleasure, and we'll let you know in our Practical Longevity newsletter what's coming up next. From all of us at WellMe, we wish you a wonderful day and a wellness optimized week and a long and vibrant health span. Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Okay. That was great. Thank you. Oh,
super.
yay.